Okay, so welcome back, round 7, last round of the day, and I am lucky enough to get Yan-CHANG as my commentary again. I really enjoy his games. This time he's playing Chang from Taiwan. Song is black, Chang is white, and Chang has played the chimney as white. The chimney is a slightly unusual opening because normally players are in the early part of the game are trying to minimise their opponent's options by playing few discs. The chimney actually takes quite a large block quite quickly. It's move 6, and it takes a big block of pieces. But black doesn't have a nice way to play through, and the game kind of starts to revert to a normal game afterwards. But it does have certain characteristics about it as well, because black has to make a choice about whether to try and use the fact that the block is there and start pulling in a certain direction, or to just play through the block and start to try and get central discs again. In this case, Song has chosen to do one of the bigger moves through the middle. So we are back into a position where white is now thinking of playing quietly. Okay, and black is taking quiet moves. It's a very equal position. One way of thinking about it is to say, are there similar characteristics on both sides? So when the game is following a certain style where one player is pulling towards a corner or an edge, and the other one is taking a wall but hoping that they can force their opponent to play through it, it's harder to judge who's winning sometimes, because you know that it's going to go one way or the other and start swinging. In this kind of game, you can see that white has f5, black has b4, and they are both kind of rogue discs on the wrong side of the opponent's pieces, which means that it makes it slightly difficult for both players to find quiet moves. So, for example, f5 means that f3 isn't a decent move pulling towards the top, because it also flips f4, and the flip of that is that d6 is not a good move for black, because it also flips c5, taking too many pieces at the edge. So in some ways, you get a kind of mini fight over access, which is what has happened just here. G4 flips 3 pieces, running into the middle, and the natural response to that would be f3, but black doesn't have access there yet. If black tries to get access there with a central move, for example d6, taking lots of pieces, but they're all central, then white can deny the access again with c6. It's not clear whether he'd want to do that, but it's certainly an option. So, in a way, the fight at the moment is central discs. You don't want to lose access to everywhere, but you can tell that the position's pretty equal, because if you try and judge it on any kind of given characteristic, you could say that it's true both for black and for white. Now, after each alternate move, they seem to be flipping central discs and then saying, well, it's your move now. So f3 is an exceptional move for black, so white has chosen to play it himself. I've said it previously and I'll say it again. Sometimes your best move is taking away your opponent's best move by playing it. Black straight through the middle again. So white now has f6, which is a very quiet move, but should be slightly concerned possibly about b5 from black. The reason being that the natural response to that would be b3, but white doesn't have any pieces on the c3 to e6 diagonal. So then he would either need to kind of find, white would need to find another move down through that block that black will have made, or play up onto the top edge. And so after f6, b5, e5 will be white. So what is quite a nice move on the top edge at the moment, e1, will disappear. So although it's a perfectly quiet move to f6, it's worth considering the order that you play them in. And in this case, that's what's happened. Chang has decided to play e1 first because it doesn't flip along the e column, and f6 is still available afterwards. So even if you've got a really, really good move, a really quiet move, only flips internal discs, in and of itself, it could not be better. It's worth always thinking, is it going anywhere? Is there something else that I can do first? And then still do that afterwards. You do run the risk of black taking your move away. In this case, he can't play there directly himself. Song can't play to f6, but he can play, for example, g6, which means that you actually have one move each in that area. But he's done the move that I suggested. I suggested it if white played f6, but the reasoning's the same. Plays b5, and white doesn't have the natural response to b3, and it also takes away white's access to f1. So, and b3 actually becomes a nice move for black as well now, just flipping the one piece internally. White will be thinking that f6 is still a nice move, and if black goes to b3, then he loses access there. So what does he need to think about with respect to that? But also, he's taken that e1 move, and d1 is also a possibility, something that starts pulling black towards the top edge. But we know that Yan-CHANG is very patient when his opponent is pulling him towards an edge or a corner. He's quite happy to have a block and say, well, I'm just going to sacrifice what I need to sacrifice to get you to play through this in a bad way. But Chang has chosen to play f6 now before it goes away. And black now has b3, which is quite nice because white has taken some pieces at the top, which poison his play on the left. But he also has d1, and that's an interesting one because white can't play to f1 and say, well, I'm going to offer you the edge back. So, and he's actually played it. So white now has a choice of taking it, but giving f2. If he takes c1, which he is doing, then it gives black a really nice move to f2. So this idea of keeping central discs and playing quiet moves is being executed really well by black at the moment. The b3 move is still there, and it's white's move, and you can now see also that b5 has meant that b3 is not available to white. It's still the case. It's not going anywhere. So white has taken f1, completed his symmetrical edge. It's not too bad a position in and of itself, but what black still has b3 to come. This is getting to the point where each player is now thinking about how the game is going to progress in the middle of the game. So it's quite likely that after b3, which has just been played, white is able to look at playing a3 and a4, and that really does start putting the pressure on black. And if white can get black to sacrifice into the top left corner, then there's 4 spaces there, and black will only get 1 wedge. White will get the last move. But we do know that Yan-CHANG is good at playing these blocks. So even if white takes a4, you need to notice that black doesn't have any discs on the b4 to e1 diagonal, so he can't play the natural move of a5 after a4. However, he has managed to do it in such a way that there's another move, the g6 move, which applies pressure to white to actually play through. So sticking with the strategy, Chang takes a4. White doesn't have black, Yan-CHANG doesn't have the natural move to a5, so he has to do something on the right or down, probably taking the f6 disc with g6, because then white will have to play through or play h6. h6 would be quite a natural move because the 6th row is all black, but so Song has taken f6 as predicted. So h6 would be quite a natural move here because it doesn't flip along the 6th row. However, h4 doesn't flip along the 4 row, which is the downside of the strategy that white Chang was playing on the left. He's made some rows all his colour. So it's not obvious what the best thing white can do here is now. Play on the left, a6 leaves a hole. He's playing that. It's normally good where an edge is shared. It's not always the case, but it's often the case that getting the inside of a shared edge is better, just because if you make a sacrifice at either end, it's very difficult to swindle it. If someone takes the corner, you always get to play out from the wedge. But the reason he's almost been forced to do it is because he's either plays through big into the south, or he played the h6 move and allows the h4 move back, neither of which are very satisfying and seem to be closing in around decimating that black block. So what he's done instead is he's played a6. He's inviting black, Yan-CHANG, to play a5, and then he wants to play b6. And the reason he wants to do this is because black has no immediate access to his obvious move, which would be c6, and white does have access there afterwards. So it would then be black's move, and then white would play c6, and then it would be black's move again. And black has got moves. He can play h3, and he can play follow up with g3. He may not even have to play g3 immediately, or white may not have to play c6 immediately. So I assume that black will go in the hole, a5. And if he does, then white going to b6, black to h3, and then white might want to do something else, for example h4, because if black takes that edge back, the e2 disc poisons it, it comes back, and then white gets g3. Black would almost be forced to take h2. So the a5 move isn't going anywhere. The b5 disc now poisons h5, so black can play h3, and white has to find a move. White would probably play b6, because although the hole's still on the left-hand side, the same reasoning applies. Black can't play immediately to c6. I can't see that this will work out well for white, but it's quite a clever little play just to find an extra move from somewhere. It's possible that once this is played out slightly as well, so just for example, if black does play a5 and white b6 and black h3 and white c6, and then black g3, white would then have to play, but black would have taken a lot of pieces on the right hand side, and white's moves would no longer be, they wouldn't be at all poisoned, so he'd be able to play well, let's see what has actually happened. Yan has played h3 immediately, and as I said, yeah, so we talked about this having played out the left hasn't been played out, but the same line is still happening. So h3 followed by h4 means that when h5 is played, and Yan obviously looked ahead to see that this would be happening and decided that he was happy with it, but he flips diagonally and gives g3 as an extra move to white. Which he's taken. So it's a different order, but it's essentially the same thing. Black now still has to think about this kind of difficulty with a5, b6, and then c6 not being immediately available. So, and even if he doesn't play a5, b6, not leaving c6 immediately available, and if he takes the a5 hole after white has played b6, then white gets access to c6, and I think it may even be exactly the same position after the two different lines. So black will need to find something else. As I said before, if white gets black to sacrifice in the top left corner, it looks like it could be pretty good for white because it's an even region. However, having played a6, the B column is now all white. So if black chooses to sacrifice by playing b2, white can't get into the corner immediately because the diagonal is all black, which means that wherever white goes next, black can then make a second sacrifice in that corner, a second move in that corner, for example, a2. Now, he needs to be a bit careful because the diagonal is all black. So whilst it means that white can't get in the corner immediately, if the second move is made, it does mean if a2 is later played as black and diagonal is still black, then white can play a1 without giving black access to b2, and then white would have access to b2 and have a huge massive discs in the corner. So Yan-CHANG has taken a5, and we'll just see how they choose to play this out. But I expect b6 to be the next move. And then I would expect Yan-CHANG to play b2. And as I said before, when a6 was first played, it's often good to get on a shared edge the inside discs rather than the outside ones. If you don't know what's going to happen later in the game, it's always good to have the inside ones. It's more easy to take advantage of their strengths. But in this case, it's coming to fruition as well, because black can now play b2, which white can't take the corner immediately, and then black would also look to play a2, give white the a1 corner, and then take the b1 wedge. But, as I said before, he doesn't want to do that unless there's a white disc on the main diagonal from b2 down to f6. If there's not a white disc on that diagonal, then black can't play a2. So after b2, white c6, which is the very natural move. It's perfectly quiet, and it takes away black's best move as well. It still doesn't cut the diagonal, so black still wouldn't be able to play a2 yet. He's already flipped c2, so he can't play b1. So he would need to turn his attention elsewhere. He could play down to c7 and probably get pulled straight out with c8, leaving the position leaving the whole game in a very similar position, following the same trend that it's been following. So at some point it looks like black is going to have to play h2. It's an ugly edge, but it's an extra move that he needs. And if white does anything that puts a piece on the G column, then it does mean that black would also be able to play G2 to complete the sacrifice in the top right hand corner, trying to get 3 moves out of the 4 up there. But white is still in quite a... I don't feel that it's a good position, but I feel that he has good moves. So c6 is a good move for white, irrespective of what black does. And then when he gets to play d7 as well, as it stands, it's quite possible that black wouldn't have access from a3 down to e7. Okay, so Song has chosen to sacrifice the top left corner. Instead of doing it in b2 first, he's just decided to do it in b1 first. And I'm guessing the reason he's done that is if white doesn't take a1 immediately, then he can take the edge back at g1. And it's a balanced edge, and it doesn't flip diagonally when he moves there. And white will have to find another move. So if white, for example, plays c6 now, black takes the top edge with g1, and white has to find another move, probably d7. Which looks pretty close. But if white does take it, then black now has access to c6, taking away what is and has been a very strong move that was coming for white. So Chang has taken a1, and I'd be very, very surprised if black Song didn't now play c6, because that was his whole purpose for playing b1. So white is now thinking, you know, if it was black's move, what can he do? The only thing he can really do, you know, the A2 B2 pair would get played out very quickly in white's favour. C7 is that's probably not a bad option, but C8 keeps things very white and black not having much access. It doesn't have the natural move of D7 afterwards because he's not on that mini diagonal from A4 to C6. So it still looks like black is going to have to play out the top right corner as well. There is an interesting line where if black does play C7 and white does pull out with C8, black could play G1 and then if white doesn't play G2, black can play B2 without flipping any down the B column, and all of the 2 row will be black. So then black would get the last move, like both moves of A2 and B2. So just to explain that again, if black plays C7 and white does the move that seems to be in fitting with the theme, but it's probably not the best move, so I wouldn't play it because of this reason. Oh, okay. So white is playing it anyway. We were doing it hypothetically because of black's limited choices, we were doing it hypothetically to see what would happen if black went there. But there's so what I was suggesting was and it doesn't look that easy to get there. Okay, so it looks like black is also going to now have the option of sacrificing the bottom left corner and the top right. But the bottom left one possibly has more advantages. What white it feels that all white's moves have far too much potential for being swindled. So, for example, D8. Okay, so he's actually played H7. But if D5 and E6 both turn white at some point, then black can play A2. And without flipping diagonally, he can then follow that up with B2 at leisure. And by at leisure, possibly the end of the game, so he can play out the rest of the board in parity. So white has to be exceptionally careful here. And black now has the option after move 40 down to H7, black has the option of playing H6, assuming white almost has to take back to H2, and that leaves an odd region up there for black to play out. Black could also possibly be looking at F7 here. Normally you wouldn't block yourself off from the H6 move. You kind of want the option of playing it, because the more options you've got, the more you can control the game. You take your options away, you can't control the game as much, but you then have to ask yourself the question, where's white going to go afterwards? As soon as he flips d7, as soon as white flips d7, it's possible for black to play b7 without flipping either the b column or the 7 row. h2 is another option here. And although it looks difficult to get on to the b6 f2 diagonal, if black can do so, he can play g1 and then have that swindle on the left-hand side again. So there looks like there's lots of options for black. And it's looking like white hasn't really got much choice in how to defend against it. Wherever he goes, there seems to be a huge negative. So, for example, if it was white's move, which I'm aware it's not, e8 would allow black to play c8 without flipping the c column. So the black just has to find one move now. And I'm wondering whether h2, h6 would be playing out a pair but get the odd region. Okay, so black's going down the route of sacrificing the bottom left corner. Starting with b8, he's probably now going to lose access. If white plays d8, he will lose access to b7. And it's not quite clear how he gets back on. That's interesting. So now if this is me thinking out loud, so it might lead down a wrong alley, but it's certainly worth looking at. If white plays d8, ask yourself the question, where does black go immediately afterwards? Because he doesn't have access to b7, which is where he'd like to go. He doesn't have access to e8. He doesn't have access to e7. So he would then be back in the situation of playing h2 or h6. h6 would just give white the edge. Black can't sacrifice the top 3 immediately because the whole of the G column will be black and you'll get swindled in the top corner. So after d8, black could again consider f7 and just say, okay, where are you going to go now? And the answer would probably be e7. But the question is, can black get back on that main diagonal? He can by playing out the a2, b2 pair, but the threat of the swindle dissipates then. Well, it disappears completely. So there's a number of things for black to be thinking in this situation. He's probably thinking, I should be, I feel that I'm winning, but I've got to make sure that all of these negative characteristics of white's position, I need to make sure that at least one of them goes completely against what white wants to happen. So, for example, as I said before, if one negative aspect of this position for white is if that d5 and e6 both turn white, black can go to a2 and then have b2 available because he doesn't flip diagonally and doesn't allow access to white to b2. And getting both of those two moves whilst white is having to play elsewhere should be enough to win the game. but I think I expect d8 here, just because I can't see. I think that it's the only thing that gives black problems, or makes black have to think. Because, as I said, there's no access to b7. There's no access to e7. There's no access to e8. Black could choose to play c8 after d8, and just carry on with the sacrificing of the corner. The problem for white, even there, as I said, there seems to be so many potential slip-ups for white. If white plays d8 and black plays c8, and white takes the corner, black can play a7 without flipping diagonally that way, and so that swindle that we were talking about in the top left corner actually happens in the bottom right corner. So because not because it's all white this time, but white doesn't have access because the 7 rows all black. So maybe d8 isn't as good as I had originally hoped. But it's difficult to see what's any better. So e7 is another option. What would black do after that? Well, black would still have the d5 disc if white plays e7, so he might well just carry on with the plan of sacrificing the bottom corner. He needs to be careful not to make everything too even. He needs to force there to be something else that happens, not just make all the regions even, because at the end of the game, obviously, white would just follow black into all of those even regions and claim all the unflippable discs. But, as I said, it looks incredibly difficult for white to avoid all of the potential swindles and downfalls of this position. Okay, so my original suggestion of d8 is played, and the question is whether Yan-CHANG agrees with my response, which would be c8. In fact, if he does play c8 and white does take the corner, which he, I say, probably not afford not to do, but nor can he afford to allow black to take it back. Black has two ways of playing out the swindle, because the B column is all white. D7 would be black, so he could play to B7 and make the whole of the 7 row black, so white doesn't get any access to A7. Black's access is guaranteed because it's good to have the inside disk of a shared edge. So what happens if white doesn't take that corner, if black plays to c8? Then we assume that instead he would go to something like e8. That would give black the edge, and then white will find it incredibly difficult, in fact impossible, not to flip the e6 disc, and as soon as that happens, the swindle in a2, b2 comes into play. So this looks like it's just going to be a trivial black win. But I've said that before and been wrong, so one of the things I love about watching the best players in the world is they can be incredibly resourceful. So he's played the move that I suggested. Song has played c8. and white recognises the difficulty with taking the corner, so plays e8. Black will take the edge. So I've just had a question as to whether black is at an advantage right now, and yes, I mean white has got so many pitfalls that something is going to go wrong. He's tried to avoid one of the pitfalls by playing move 44 onto e8, because taking the corner he gets swindled with a7 and b7. But this doesn't work out much better, because if black takes the edge, white is almost certain to flip e6 on the next move or the move after. The only other option is h6, black takes the corner, and then white flips e6 anyway, at which point black can play a2, and b2 is not available to white, so black gets to play that later as well. So so yeah, it's not just an advantage. I'm trying to make a commentary of a game that's effectively dead. This is going to be a black win. Okay, so as I said, the best players can often be very, very resourceful, and Chang is doing his best to make a fight of this. So the idea behind that move is that if black plays e7, h6, giving black the corner would give white the wedge. I can't see it working, but we'll see. F7 is also a possibility, which is the one that Song has chosen to play. And so, yeah, it's working out in a different order in a slightly different way, but if white plays e7, then the a2b2 swindle is available again immediately to black. Not only that, but if white plays e7, black plays a2, white can't play to b2, his only move is h6, and just to rub salt into the wound, when black takes the h8 corner, he doesn't flip diagonally either, so he gets a swindle in that corner as well. So that would be h8 and g8. So white really doesn't want to play e7, but you ask yourself the question, does he want to play h6? Probably, because if black takes the corner, white gets the wedge. But even then, you're in the situation where black will take, even if it's not the right actual best sequence of moves, if white plays h6 and black takes the corner, he doesn't flip diagonally, white is forced to take the wedge, will do so. Black could take the last move there, white takes the a8 corner, and then there's the swindle a7 and b7, which you probably wouldn't want to take both of those immediately. It does leave the two even regions, so black has to be slightly careful of how he plays it out. But e7 is a no-brainer not to play here. He has to play h6, and he has done so. And so Yan-CHANG electing to take the corner. He's got to be slightly careful, because he will want to feed into the even regions, and by feed I mean give white two moves so that he can get the last move there. But his only way Okay, no, so the swindle's coming up anyway in the A2, B. Yeah, so instead of playing E7 now, I just do the swindle. It was always coming at some point. You just had to be careful to play it before it goes away again. And the swindling, okay, so after A8, which is just being played, not yet showing on the board, the swindle for A7 and B7 is also happening. And E7 now flips B4, so allows big moves there as well. It allows the majority of the B column to become black. Now he probably wants to feed. So he's taken one of the moves. He's taken the other one as well. He's not bothered about feeding. He's counted a win and he's just going to play it. It's just a matter of counting, and the best line now probably H2, G1, H1, but I haven't counted. And another nice win for Yan-CHANG. And going into the end game, there was just too many things that white couldn't do without giving black swindles. And we saw a lot of those swindles actually play out. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed that. And we look forward to sharing more with you tomorrow.